The radio had been alive for 11 seconds. That was all it took for 8 men to understand they were going to die. Pale Anvil, this is Prout. 8 men. Northeast Canyon Wall, we are pinned. 0 egress. The voice that came back belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Harlan Stokes, and it arrived the way bad news arrives when the man delivering it has already accepted the mathematics before he opens his mouth. Flat, clean, without decoration. No air support available, Sergeant. Minimum 40 minutes. A pause that had physical weight to it. Understood, a single beat, then quieter almost to himself. 8 lives, Colonel. Static answered him. 11 seconds, and Master Sergeant Dwight Prout was running the only calculation that mattered inside a canyon with sheer walls and automatic weapons fire converging from 3 directions at once. He did not know that someone else had started running that same calculation for him. He did not know she had been in this sector for 3 days. He did not know that on a limestone shelf 50 feet above his position, a pair of pale amber eyes had been fixed on the heaviest gun emplacement for the past 4 minutes, and the woman behind those eyes was no longer waiting for permission. She pressed the rifle into her shoulder, settled the reticle, found the quiet space between heartbeats. Spectre 6, you are not authorized to engage. That is a direct order. She did not respond. Her name was Sergeant First Class Wren Callahan. In the world that existed on paper, she did not exist at all. 72 hours before that radio call, on a morning when the Big Bend Desert still held the night's cold in its stone, and the sun had not cleared the Chizo's ridgeline, Wren sat across a metal table from Harlan Stokes and a single manila envelope at Laughlin Air Force Base, and she did not speak until he did. Stokes was 51 years old. He had the face of a man who had stopped registering surprise at some point in the past decade and had decided not to miss it. He slid the envelope across the table without ceremony. Ranger Element, 8 men. 4-day reconnaissance in Sector Pale Anvil. Standard Shadow Protocol, keep them alive. She opened the envelope and read, thoroughly. It took 4 minutes, then she looked up. Extract timeline. 72 hours from insertion. Air assets. Unavailable in sector. Terrain interference with drone coverage. That is why you are going. She picked up the single sheet from the envelope, and Stokes slid a lighter across the table without being asked. She burned the sheet in the metal tray at the corner of the desk, watched it curl and blacken and become ash, and stood. I will need the terrain overlay for the western approach. Already loaded on your device. She turned toward the door. Callahan. She stopped but did not turn. This is a straightforward deployment. Observe, protect, extract. She said nothing. She walked out into the Texas dark. The drive from Laughlin to the staging point at the edge of the Big Bend backcountry was 2.5 hours. She drove alone, in an unmarked truck with the heater off and the windows cracked, because she had learned long ago that you do not let yourself get comfortable before a long deployment. Comfort makes you slow. Slowness, in the places she worked, was not something you recovered from. She grew up 40 miles north, in Alpine, Texas. Her father had walked this ground for 28 years as a Border Patrol agent assigned to the Big Bend sector, and he had brought her into these canyons before she was old enough to name what they were. She knew which arroyos flooded in a 3-minute rainstorm. She knew which limestone outcroppings channeled the wind and which swallowed it entirely. She knew where the water collected in the rock and where it vanished without warning. She knew the smell of the Chihuahuan Desert at 4 in the morning the way most people know the layout of their childhood bedroom. Bone deep, automatic, complete. Her father's name had been Frank Callahan. He had been dead for 6 years. She thought about something he said to her nearly every day she was in the field. At the staging point, she killed the engine, sat in the silence for 30 seconds, and shouldered her pack. 62 pounds. 4 days of food and water calculated to the ounce, a medical kit, a spotting scope, a radio, and the rifle. The rifle was an M2010 enhanced sniper system chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, 47 inches long, 15.5 pounds unloaded. In practiced hands under optimal conditions, it could deliver accurate fire to 1,200 meters. Wren Callahan was not invested in optimal conditions. She was invested in whatever conditions she found when she arrived. She had been shooting rifles since she was 6 years old, and she had long since stopped treating the gap between optimal and actual as a limitation. It was simply the next part of the problem to solve. She moved through the desert alone in the dark at a pace that looked unhurried but covered ground efficiently. No headlamp. None needed. She crossed 4 miles of open desert floor, climbed a loose shale slope that would have turned most people back, and reached her initial observation point 40 minutes before the ranger element's expected arrival at the sector perimeter. She was in position before they ever left their trucks. From the elevated limestone shelf, she could see the full length of the approach corridor. A shallow valley floor of pale caliche soil flanked by broken rock ridges that threw long blue shadows in the pre-dawn light. She scanned methodically. 3 possible observation posts to the north, 1 rocky prominence to the southwest with clean sightlines across the valley, 2 natural choke points where the canyon walls narrowed. She marked them all in her memory and moved on. Then she found the tripwire. 40 meters into the valley, strung 8 inches off the ground between 2 scrub cedar stumps, nearly invisible in the ambient light. She found it only because she had been looking, because someone who understood this terrain had placed it at exactly the height a moving patrol would clip when their eyes were on the ground rather than the air in front of their shins. She followed the wire to a small depression behind a rock formation and found the detonator block. She studied it without moving for a long time. The compound was real. The wiring was real. The blasting cap was not a training device. This was a live device on the primary approach corridor of an American Ranger reconnaissance element, placed there by someone who knew they were coming. She keyed her radio. Spectre 6 to Overwatch. Live device on the primary approach. Request clarification on mission status. Stokes responded in 4 seconds. Mission status is unchanged. Continue observation protocol. Colonel, this device is not a training prop. A pause that lasted longer than it should have. Handled, continue. She lowered her hand, looked at the device for 3 more seconds, then she moved. Getting to it required crossing 60 meters of open ground before first light hit the valley floor. She covered it in under 90 seconds, moving flat on her elbows and toes across pale stone, not breathing hard, not hurrying, operating with the efficiency that comes from a decade of teaching your body that its own limits are simply the starting point rather than the boundary. She disconnected the detonator in under a minute, pocketed the triggering mechanism, moved back to her position without leaving a trace that she had been there. She did not ask who had placed it. She stored those questions and went back to watching the valley. The wind came through the canyon mouth from the southwest. It was a low sound, channeled by the stone into something between a tone and a vibration, and it moved through the rock the way her father had once described it to her, like the land exhaling, like the canyon breathing. He had told her that sound never lied. When you heard it, something was moving inside the walls whether you could see it or not. She adjusted her scope 0.3 of a mil to the right. She allowed herself 10 seconds. His hands on her shoulders when she was 9 years old, kneeling behind her at the shooting bench he had built in the wash behind their house, adjusting her grip on a bolt action .22 with the unhurried patience of a man teaching a lesson that had nothing to do with the paper target downrange. Wind doesn't lie, Wren. Everything else does. Read the wind and you never get surprised. 10 seconds. Then she went still and went back to work. The Ranger element arrived at 6:12. 8 men in a disciplined column, dressed in muted desert pattern, carrying their rifles with the loose readiness of soldiers who stopped performing competence years ago and simply have it. Their point man was good. Their intervals were correct. Their route selection was sound. Their leader was Master Sergeant Dwight Pruitt. She had read his file during the briefing. 38 years old, 4 tour, 11 years in the Ranger Regiment. The file described him as tactically aggressive with strong instincts and a consistent tendency to trust observation over intelligence reports when the two conflicted. Looking at him move through the valley, she thought the file had undersold him. He had the build of a man who has spent his working life carrying heavy things over difficult terrain, and arrived at a point where neither the weight nor the ground registers as remarkable anymore. He moved with the easy economy of someone for whom field work is simply the medium in which his life takes place. She watched him pause twice in the first 200 meters to scan the high ground on the western ridge. He was not following doctrine when he did it. He was following something older than doctrine. The particular instinct that develops in men who have survived enough bad situations to know that the ground above them deserves a second look, even when the briefing does not mention a threat. On the second scan, he covered her position directly. She did not breathe. She did not move. She had built the ghillie wrap herself over 2 years of field deployments, designed specifically for limestone terrain, woven through with pale fabric and dried desert grass that matched the pale anvil rock face, the way camouflage matches its purpose when it was made by someone who knows the specific ground. Pruitt's eyes moved across her and continued without stopping. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. She watched him give a quiet hand signal to the column and thought, without competition or pride, that he was very good at his job, and that she was better at hers. She followed the Ranger element along the ridge, moving in parallel 300 meters to their north, repositioning in short, deliberate bounds that kept her inside dead ground when the terrain allowed. She moved when they moved. She held when they held. She ate nothing and drank 2 measured swallows of water in 6 hours. The sun climbed, and the desert turned from blue shadow to hard white, and she tracked her charges through the heat shimmer, with the focus of something that does not require comfort to function. At the second waypoint, she found a new observation position and watched Pruitt set up his security perimeter. Good sightlines, overlapping coverage. He positioned his radio operator at the center. He checked the high ground again. Her ridge. She was already somewhere else. 2 hours later, moving along a secondary shelf that paralleled the main canyon system, she found the cache. It was hidden at the base of a limestone column that jutted from the canyon wall at a slight angle, creating a narrow vertical gap between the stone and the cliff face. 18 inches wide, invisible from the canyon floor. She found it because her father had marked it in his patrol journal with a small penciled cross and the notation, "Old Cache Point. Nobody knows this one." She had read that journal so many times that she could navigate the entire Big Bend sector from its pages alone. She saw the camouflage fabric tucked into the gap and held still for 30 seconds, listening, scanning. Then she moved to it. Inside the gap, wrapped in waterproof material and stored with the precision of someone who intended to return for it, was a hard shell rifle case. 2 combination locks set to a specific sequence. She tried the standard Overwatch Spectre field default. It opened. Inside was a Che-TAC M200 intervention in .408 Che-TAC. The rifle was clean, oiled, loaded, with the scope zeroed and capped against dust. Next to it, in a flat nylon sleeve, were 40 rounds of match-grade ammunition. And beside the sleeve, a small black notebook with a worn cover. She picked up the notebook. On the inside front cover, written in cramped, precise handwriting, were 2 letters and a number, OS7. Below that, a name. Cole Birch. She had never met Cole Birch. She knew his designation. OS7 had been Overwatch Spectre's previous field operator in this sector, deployed 7 months ago, listed in her briefing packet under status as simply undetermined. She had not asked for elaboration. In a classified program, undetermined carried a specific meaning that no one needed to say out loud. She opened the notebook and read. The entries were dated and sequential, written by someone who remained methodical even under pressure. The first pages documented positions, distances, movement patterns of the hostile element. Page 4 noted the unusual tactical discipline of the opposing force. The tone shifted on page 6. Day 2. This is not cartel. The positioning reflects formal military doctrine. These men have been trained at a level that cartel operators do not reach. Something upstream has provided them with information about the Ranger element's route. I have requested updated intelligence from Stokes. No response. She turned the page. Day 3. I have identified 14 prepared firing positions around the main canyon approach. This site has been dressed for a specific kill scenario. Request immediate extraction and full debrief. No response from Stokes. She turned the page again. Day 4. There is a counter-sniper operating independently in this sector. He does not move with the main force. He has no fixed pattern. He has been mapping my approach corridors since I arrived. He knows a shadow operator is present. He knows before I position. I have asked for extraction 3 times. No response. The final entry was brief. The pencil had pressed harder than the rest. He has a name. People who know him call him the Architect. He knows this canyon with the familiarity of someone who has spent real time here over many years. Not from maps, not from aerial overlays. The way you know a place you have returned to many times and for reasons that are your own. I found one of his old observation points. The kind of position a man builds when he intends to come back. Whatever brings him to Pale Anvil is not the current mission. It is something older. Something personal. Below that, Cole Birch had drawn a line across the page. Below the line, 6 words written in hard pressing strokes. I don't think I'm going home. She closed the notebook. She stood for a long moment in the gap between the limestone and the cliff face. The desert pressed its silence in from every direction. 110 degrees in the open. Far below, somewhere in the canyon system to the south, a sound that might have been the wind moving through stone. She keyed her radio. Spectre 6 to Overwatch. Stokes came back in under 3 seconds. Go ahead. I have OS7's cache. I have his field notes. He documented a hostile counter-sniper operating independently in sector. He requested extraction multiple times. I need you to explain why there was no response. The pause lasted 5 full seconds. Current mission parameters are unchanged, Callahan. Continue observation protocol. Is the entity referred to as the Architect currently active in this sector? 3 seconds. Continue observation protocol. She removed her hand from the earpiece. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the rifle case. She looked out over the canyon where 8 Rangers were moving toward a kill zone that had been prepared for them by people who had known they were coming. She reached into the case, and lifted the TAC M200 out by the grip. The metal was warm from the desert heat, and the balance of the rifle felt purposeful in a way she could not immediately name. She had qualified on the platform during a technical assessment. She understood its ballistics. She had never fired it in field conditions. She turned the rifle in her hands, and then she saw the engraving. On the underside of the barrel, just forward of the receiver, pressed into the metal in small, clean letters. FCALLAHAN, Big Bend, 1997. She read it once. She read it twice. Her father's name on a rifle cached in a location her father had labeled as a place nobody knew about. Left here by a man named Cole Birch, who had come to this sector 7 months ago and had not come back, and whose last notebook entry described the architect as a man who returned to Pale Anvil for reasons that were personal and old, and that had nothing to do with the current operation. She looked at the name in the metal for a long time. Then the first burst of automatic weapons fire came up from the canyon floor, and Dwight Pruitt's voice cut through her earpiece with the controlled urgency of a man who has accepted the situation and is already working the problem. Pale Anvil, this is Pruitt, 8 men, Northeast Canyon Wall, we are pinned, 0 egress. And 240 miles away, Harlan Stokes told him there was no air support, not for 40 minutes. She set the TAC down beside her, picked up the M2010, checked the chamber, settled behind the scope. 14 prepared positions below. 8 rangers in a kill zone designed by someone who had studied this terrain for longer than any of them had been assigned here. And somewhere in the canyon system, a man who had spent years returning to this place for reasons Cole Birch had identified as personal, who had watched her movements since she arrived, who was not here because of the rangers. She was beginning to understand what he was here for. She pressed the earpiece. Spectre 6 to Overwatch. I have targeting solutions on priority threats, requesting authorization to engage. Spectre 6, you are not authorized. Stand down. She found the machine gun position at the northeast wall. The gunner had a direct line on 3 of Pruitt's men. At 300 rounds per minute, 40 minutes did not exist in any version of the mathematics that kept those 3 men alive. Spectre 6, that is a direct order. You stand down. She heard Pruitt's voice, quiet, not into any radio, but said to the man beside him in the dust and the heat. 8 lives. She exhaled, settled the reticle, found the space. And fired. The shot crossed the canyon, and the machine gun went silent. Below, 8 rangers pressed flat against the rock and looked at each other with the specific expression of men who understand that something has just intervened in their situation from a direction no one was covering. She cycled the bolt and found the next target. She had 13 more positions to clear before the canyon floor would be safe enough to call finished. And somewhere on the north rim, in a position she had not yet located but knew was there, a man named the architect was watching every shot she took and doing the same thing she had been doing to the rangers for 3 days. Learning her. She worked through the remaining positions in sequence, priority of lethality first. The RPG gunner on the south wall before he could close enough for overpressure to be the threat rather than fragmentation. The Dragunov on the upper east rim after 90 seconds of patience and pattern reading. A forward observer behind a narrow rock formation who had a radio and binoculars and was the node that made the whole ambush coherent. She did not think about him differently on account of the radio rather than the rifle. In a prepared kill zone, the observer is the architecture. She removed the architecture. The remaining positions came down in 11 minutes. Then the canyon went quiet in the particular way. It goes quiet when the thing generating the noise stops rather than merely pauses. And Wren swept the full arc of the canyon and found nothing moving, and nothing aimed, and 14 prepared positions either empty or permanently still. She watched Dwight Prute count his men. He did it twice. 7. Then 8, as the last one came in from a position south of the main group, and Prute put his hand flat on the man's shoulder and held it there for 2 full seconds before letting go. She exhaled. Then she scanned north. She found the architect on her 4th pass. 1,100 meters to the northeast, behind a rock formation at the canyon rim that jutted forward like the prow of a ship. She identified him only because she noticed the absence of shadow where shadow should have been, a slight disruption in the negative space behind the formation that said something was there that was not stone. She steadied on him. He was not looking at the Rangers. He was looking at her. His scope was oriented at exactly the angle required to observe her position. She could not see his face, but she could read the way he held the rifle, the absolute stillness of his body, the particular quality of a shooter who is not preparing to fire but studying. He was doing to her what she had done to the Rangers for 3 days, absorbing the details of how she worked, where she positioned, how she selected targets and moved between shots. He was building a file. Then he raised his left hand above the rock line, open palm, held it for 3 seconds, then it withdrew. Not a threat, not a signal. An acknowledgement. The precise and deliberate recognition of one professional for another, across 1,000 meters of Big Bend desert, telling her without ambiguity that he had known she was there before she settled into her current position, that he had been watching since before she found the cache, and that whatever happened next was going to be something other than what she had been briefed to expect. She did not respond. She swept the scope to the valley floor and counted what was left of the enemy force. Then she looked back at the northeast formation. He was gone. She found the position he had vacated and studied it, then his secondary position 300 meters farther north, then the tertiary beyond that. He had moved 3 times since the engagement began, always to ground with better sightlines to her previous location. Each position was a study in patience and in reading terrain. She recognized the methodology the way you recognize something learned from the same source. He was not hunting the Rangers. He had come to Pale Anvil for something else entirely. She looked at the Che TAC M200 beside her, at the engraving on the barrel, at the name of a man who had been dead for 6 years. She looked at the canyon where 8 men were still alive who should not have been. And she began to understand that the next part of this was going to be harder than the shooting. She had not moved from her position in 20 minutes. The canyon below had settled into the specific silence that follows violence in a contained space. Not peace, suspension. The quality of air after a fire has been put out, but before anyone is certain, it will not restart. She used the time the way she used all field time when action was not immediately required, systematically, covering every degree of the arc she could observe, letting her eyes move in the disciplined, slow pattern that her father had drilled into her before she was old enough for the reasoning behind it to make full sense. The reasoning was this: a sniper who looks for threats only in the places threats are expected to be is doing target practice. A sniper in the field looks everywhere with the same attention, because the threat that ends you is always the one occupying the ground you decided was not worth checking. She checked all of it. Nothing moved in the 14 prepared positions she had cleared. Nothing moved along the canyon rims to the east or south. The Rangers were consolidating their ground with the clean efficiency of a unit that has survived an unexpected contact and shifted from shock into function without losing time to either. She watched Prout orient his people on better cover, establish fields of observation on the approach corridors, position his radio operator. He did everything correctly, and he did it quickly, and she permitted herself the small professional acknowledgement that he deserved to come home from this canyon. Then she picked up Cole Birch's notebook and went back to the beginning. She had read it once under pressure, standing in the limestone gap with the Rangers still moving and Stokes still in her earpiece. She had absorbed what was immediately relevant and moved. That was the right decision at the time. This was the right decision now. She read it slowly, all of it, every entry, every margin note, every abbreviation and crossed-out word. She was looking for the thing she had missed the first time, the way she always looked for what she had missed, without assumption about where it would be or what form it would take. She found it on the inside front cover. Cole had written his mission designation at the top, PO-1. Below that, SO Alpha. She had processed PO-1 correctly on the first read. Primary objective: shadow and protect the Ranger element. SO Alpha was different. In the Overwatch Spectre designation system, SO indicated a secondary objective. Alpha was the highest priority classification a secondary objective could carry, meaning it outranked the primary under specified field conditions and reported through a separate channel directly to the program coordinator, bypassing the standard chain of command entirely. Cole Birch had been carrying a second mission, one ranked above protecting the Rangers. She turned to page 9 and found it written small in the margin, formatted as a notation rather than a log entry. SO Alpha, ID and confirm architect. Report confirmation direct to Stokes only. If architect is confirmed physically present in sector, hold position regardless of PO-1 status. Regardless of PO-1 status. Regardless of the 8 men below. She set the notebook on the stone. The afternoon heat pushed against her back. She looked at the canyon floor where Dwight Prout was still organizing his people with the quiet authority of a man who has no idea that the machinery around him is more complicated than the mission briefing described. She keyed her radio. Spectre 6 to Overwatch. Stokes answered immediately. Go ahead. I found OS7's secondary objective notation. SO Alpha, ID and confirm architect, report direct to you, hold position regardless of PO-1 status. She paused a moment. Why was I not briefed on this? The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. You were briefed on everything relevant to your current deployment. Cole Birch requested extraction 3 times. His secondary objective outranked his protection protocol. I want you to explain why he received no response. 6 seconds this time. We will conduct a full debrief on your return. Continue current mission parameters. She released the transmit button and looked at the radio in her hand for a moment. Then she put it down and picked up the Che-Tak M200. She had been tracking the architect's movements since he disappeared from the northeast formation after their silent exchange across the canyon. She had found him twice afterward. He was moving counterclockwise around her current location, always maintaining angles that gave him sightlines to wherever she had been positioned most recently. He was building a map of her the way a careful man builds anything that matters, position by position, shot by shot, with patience and without hurry. She understood what he was doing because she had done it herself for 3 days to the Rangers below. The difference was that she had stopped when her study was complete. He had not stopped, which meant his study was not yet complete, or what he was doing was not only a study. She had let him work while the canyon required her full attention. Now the canyon was quiet, and she had the time and she put it to use. He was behind a limestone formation on the northeast rim, 1,400 meters, a slot between two rock columns that provided protection on three sides and preserved a clean downward angle to the canyon floor. She had found it in 7 minutes because it was exactly where she would have gone. She did not aim at him. She aimed at a point 6 inches to the right of his scope housing, at the specific angle required to send a round through the optical assembly of his rifle, without touching the man behind it. At 1,400 meters in current wind and thermal conditions, the shot required 4 adjustments and a hold point that accounted for a thermal drift she had been charting since morning. She made the adjustments, settled behind the scope, waited for the heat shimmer to find its pause. Fired. She watched the scope housing come apart. The round struck exactly where she had placed it and nowhere else. His rifle was now blind. The man behind it was unharmed. She had put the shot precisely where she chose to put it, which was the entire message. I know where you are. I have known for some time. I chose the shot I took. Nothing moved on the northeast rim for 90 seconds. Then a hand appeared above the rock line. Open palm, 3 seconds, then gone. He had read the message and replied in the same register. She went back to her scan. She found Dwight Prute on the northwest canyon wall 2 hours later. He had climbed a jutting rock ledge 40 feet above the canyon floor, alone, having left his element below. He moved to the highest point of the ledge with the deliberate pace of a man executing something he has thought through carefully. He set a water bottle on the stone. Beside it, a strip of red cloth weighted by a piece of limestone. Then he turned to face west. West, the high ground, the direction the fire support had been coming from all day, at distances and with precision that no available unit should have been capable of achieving. He stood there for 10 seconds, hands at his sides. Then he climbed back down. She watched the ledge for 5 minutes before she moved. Getting to it required 11 minutes and a stretch of open ground she did not prefer. She used the transition light, the 40-minute window when the sun's angle makes optics unreliable and shadows run long and flat. She climbed the approach face from the blind side and found the bottle on the stone. Full, beside it, a page torn from a tactical notebook folded once. The handwriting was forward-leaning, the hand of a man who says what he means without revision. I don't know who you are or how you're doing what you're doing up there, but you have kept 8 men alive today in a situation where that should not have been possible. Whatever you need, wherever you are, we are with you. You are not alone out here. Neither are we anymore. One line at the bottom. Prude. She read it twice. She looked out over the canyon. Then she reached into her chest pack and took out the final page of Cole Birch's main notebook entries, the sketch he had made of the architect's face. Cole had been a careful observer. The drawing was specific enough to be operationally useful. She folded it once and placed it under the piece of limestone where the bottle had been. She left the water. She was carrying enough. When Prute climbed back up to check the ledge 20 minutes later, he opened the folded page in the last of the afternoon light and studied the sketch for a long time. Then he went back to his men and spoke quietly to his number 2, who pulled out his own notebook and began writing. She watched the motion from her elevated position and understood it. Prute was going to identify the face. He was going to use every resource available to an 11-year Ranger Regiment veteran to run it down through whatever channel could be accessed from the field. Because Dwight Prute was exactly the kind of soldier who does not receive a piece of information and leave it unused. Good, she wanted him looking. She was beginning to believe that the problem had more dimensions than any single angle could cover. The radio crackled. Spectre 6, Overwatch. Stokes, His voice had changed register since the last exchange. Still controlled, still professional, but carrying underneath it the particular quality of a voice when the decision it has made is one the speaker did not want to arrive at. Go ahead. Mission parameters have been updated. You are to extract via the northeast corridor immediately. The Ranger element will complete their extraction independently. Your deployment in sector is concluded as of this transmission. She kept her voice level. 8 men are still in a prepared kill zone, with active threat positions uncleared. Rangers are equipped and capable of independent extraction. Your continued presence is not required. Colonel, there are active positions on the northern approach. Spectre 6, this is a direct order. Extract now. She held the radio for 3 seconds. I found the back section of OS7's notebook, the section behind the glued inner cover. The silence that followed was the longest Stokes had allowed himself since the operation began. 8 seconds. What did you find? Not a question, a damage assessment. I have not opened it yet, she said. I thought you might want to tell me what is in it before I do. 5 seconds. Extract immediately, Callahan. I will provide a full briefing on your return in a classified environment. What you have found requires context I cannot provide in the field. Understood, she said. I will extract after I clear the remaining threat positions. That is not authorized. I know. She put the radio in her pack. The back cover of Cole Birch's notebook was standard black cardboard with a thin inner lining. He had sealed the lining along all 4 edges with rubber cement applied carefully. She ran her thumbnail along the right edge and it opened. He had not hidden it to make it difficult to reach. He had hidden it to make it inconspicuous. Those are different purposes, and the difference tells you something about the man. Inside the lining was a single sheet of paper folded twice. She held it flat against the stone in the last of the evening light. The handwriting was more compressed than Cole's journal entries, pressed harder. The hand of someone writing for someone they would never meet and trying to give them everything they needed in the space available. If you are reading this, Stokes did not give you the full picture. I am writing this because I believe the next operator in Sector deserves to understand what Overwatch Spectre actually is before they find out the hard way the way I found out. The architect is not incidental to this mission. He is the reason this program has been running operations in this sector for 3 years. Overwatch Spectre has been attempting to confirm his location and build an actionable intelligence file on him, because the architect holds knowledge of American special operations methodology that was not obtained through intelligence gathering. It was obtained through direct instruction from someone inside the American system. Stokes knows who that person was and has not shared it. The Ranger element is not the mission. They create plausible hostile activity in sector. That plausible hostile activity creates a credible reason for a shadow operator to be present. That shadow operator is the lure. We are the lure. The Rangers do not know this. They will not be told. I was not told. I worked it out on day 4, too late. I requested extraction 3 times. I received no response. I believe I am not intended to extract. I believe my continued presence in sector, including whatever happens to me here, falls within the program's acceptable risk parameters. I want the next person who reads this to understand that before they go any further. I do not know who trained the architect, but Cole Birch's journal entry about his old observation points holds one detail I need you to read carefully. He does not come back to Pale Anvil because of any current operational requirement. He comes back here because this place holds something for him that is personal and old. I believe whoever trained him did it here. I believe Pale Anvil is where this started, and whatever started it has never fully finished. Stay alive, be smarter than I was. She folded the page and looked out over the canyon. The desert had gone dark around her. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in the time it took to read the page. The thermal cliff the high desert falls from when the sun goes, and the cold comes down from above while the rock pushes its stored heat up from below. She was caught between the two forces the way you are when something has just rearranged the entire meaning of the situation you are in. She looked down at the canyon floor. Tiny lights in the dark. Prout's element had established a night position behind a rocky formation with observation angles on 3 approach vectors. 8 men who believed they were conducting a reconnaissance operation and had spent the day surviving an ambush that had been constructed specifically to make their presence in this canyon feel plausible. They were plausible. They had always been plausible. They had never been the point. She folded Cole's page and put it in her chest pack alongside the water bottle Prout had left her, the note he had written, and the remainder of the match-grade ammunition for the Che-tac. She looked at the notebook one more time, at the secondary objective notation written in Cole Birch's careful hand, at the words she had been turning over since she first saw them. Regardless of Po 1 status. Regardless of the 8 men below. She thought of Prout setting a water bottle on a ledge and facing west for 10 seconds with his hands at his sides, not looking for anything, just acknowledging that something was up there that had kept his people alive. That gesture did not belong to a man who was acceptable collateral damage for any program's architecture. It belonged to a man who came home to people who needed him to come home, and who had done everything right today, and who had no idea that the mission he was standing inside was not the mission he had been briefed on. She made her choice. It took no deliberation. The conditions were clear and the decision followed from them with the same logic that a ballistic calculation follows from the known variables. She had come to Pale Anvil to keep 8 men alive. That was still the job. Whatever else this deployment was supposed to be was Stokes's architecture and Stokes's problem. She was a sniper. The people below were soldiers. The mathematics had not changed. She put the radio in her pack without keying it. She picked up the Che-tac M200 and settled behind it for the first time as a weapon rather than a study. She checked the zero, felt the balance of the rifle, and oriented herself toward the northern approach where the next threat was already moving. The second wave was coming. She could read it in the quality of the silence, the way certain silences are not quiet but compressed, carrying in them the preparation for something that has not yet begun. She rested her cheek against the stock. Her father's name was in the metal beneath her hands. She was ready. The second wave came at 2200 hours. 16 men from 2 directions at once, and whoever had redesigned the assault after watching the first one come apart had understood the problem correctly and applied the right solution. More numbers, better coordination, 2 simultaneous approach vectors that divided a defender's attention and forced a choice. From the east, 9 men using a terrain fold to close within 400 meters of Prout's position before they fully resolved in her scope. From the northwest, 7 more working along the ridgeline, using the darkness and the elevation with the discipline of men who had been trained to do exactly this. She had been ready for 20 minutes. She worked the northwest group first. Elevation on a night position is decisive, and she understood that with the clarity of someone who has been in the canyon below and above and knows which one she would rather occupy. The M2010 was the right instrument at these distances, 600 to 900 meters. She fired 6 rounds in 4 minutes and repositioned twice between shots, distributing her sound signature across the ridge, so the return fire had no coherent origin to orient on. It came anyway, undirected, the reflexive response of men who know they are being engaged and cannot identify from where. 4 of the 7 went down. The remaining 3 broke north and removed themselves from the problem. She set the M2010 down and picked up the Che-Tak. For the first time, not as a recovered artifact, not as a weight bearing her father's name, as the weapon it was made to be. The eastern group was at 500 meters and closing in column formation behind a natural rock shelf, pressing tight, using the stone as a traveling breastwork. At 900 meters, she would have needed patience and angle and time she did not have. At 500 meters, she had something better. She fired 4 rounds through the shelf at the positions where the stone was thinnest. The .408 Che-Tak went through solid limestone the way the round goes through things that believe themselves to be impenetrable, completely and without discussion. The column behind the shelf made an immediate collective decision about their route, and the 5 who were still capable of movement broke east toward the canyon exit. She let them run. Below, Prout had his element moving before the last echo crossed the canyon walls. He pushed them through the dead ground to their rear, oriented them on the extraction corridor, and ran them forward in the overlapping bounds of a unit that has been together long enough to share one mind in a firefight. She tracked them along the ridge above, parallel and 200 meters higher, moving through the Big Bend dark by memory and the faint starlight that is enough for someone who knows the terrain with their whole body rather than just their eyes. Prout's element reached the canyon exit corridor at 2310. She watched them establish a short halt, count their people, confirm their direction, and begin the final movement to the extraction waypoint. All 8. She held her breath for the count without meaning to, then let it out. At the edge of the canyon floor, before the last turn toward the extraction point, Prout stopped. He looked up. Not at anything specific. At the high ground. At the dark limestone ridge above him where the fire had been coming from for 2 days, at distances that should have been impossible, with a precision that had no explanation he had been given or could invent. He stood with his hands at his sides, and his face turned toward the ridge and the cold stars above it, and he was perfectly still for a long moment. He could not see her. She was above him and motionless and wearing the desert against the desert. He had no way of knowing her position. He looked up anyway. Then he nodded, one deliberate motion, small and certain, the acknowledgement that moves between professionals when words are not available and would not be sufficient anyway, the kind of recognition that does not need to name its object to reach it. She held still. He turned and followed his people into the dark. She watched until the last man was gone. Then she was alone on the ridge in the full cold of the Big Bend night, with the stars enormous overhead, and the limestone beneath her, and the canyon breathing below the way her father had always said it breathed, low and patient, and without any particular urgency, the way things breathe that have been here since before the human events that pass through them. She began breaking down her position, methodical, unhurried. She field-stripped both rifles, checked each bore, reassembled. She cleared the limestone shelf of any sign that a person had occupied it for 3 days. 30 minutes. When she shouldered her pack and turned toward her extraction route, she heard a boot contact stone. Not below her. Behind her. She had the sidearm clear of the holster before the second footstep landed. He was standing 12 feet away, hands at his sides, visible, open, the deliberate posture of a person who wants you to see immediately that the hands are empty. A rifle was slung across his back, and she marked its position and kept her sidearm on his center mass and said nothing. He was in his middle 50s, More weather on him than Cole Birch's sketch had suggested. Nothing identifying in his clothing or his equipment. He stood on the pale anvil limestone at the edge of the Big Bend night with the particular stillness of a man who has occupied difficult ground for so many years that the ground has stopped registering as difficult. "I am not here to engage you," he said. His voice was even, slightly accented in a way that years of other languages had smoothed rather than sharpened. She kept the sidearm where it was and gave him nothing. "Your father taught me to shoot," he said. "Not here specifically. He used the canyon system to the east, the one that runs toward the old Maravillas crossing. In 1997, I was part of a group he was contracted to instruct. He was told we were American security contractors preparing for overseas work." He paused. He was not told what we actually were. He performed his work with complete professionalism, and he had no way of knowing what the instruction would produce. I understood later what it had cost him to carry that. I do not believe he ever stopped carrying it. She did not speak. She watched his hands and his eyes and the rifle across his back and the terrain behind him. "At the end of our time together in 1997, he gave me that rifle." He indicated the Che-Tak with a slight movement of his eyes. "A personal gift. He had built it himself over 2 years, specific components, specific tolerances. He said he wanted someone to use it who understood what it was made for. He trusted me with it." He looked at her steadily. "That trust was not well placed. I know that. I have known it for a long time." "He died 6 years ago," she said, the first words she had spoken to him. "Yes, I knew when it happened. I came to Pale Anvil one final time that same winter. I placed the rifle in the cache he had shown me during one of our sessions, the gap in the limestone column on the east wall. He had described it once as the only place in the canyon nobody else knew about." He paused. "I engraved his name on the barrel myself before I placed it, so that this place would carry a record of him, so that whoever found it would know he had been here. That something of Frank Callahan remained in Pale Anvil regardless of what had come from his presence in it." She held the sidearm level. Her breathing was steady. Her face was still. "You knew the program would eventually send me here." "I knew Overwatch Spectre had been running this operation for 3 years. I understood its architecture long before Stokes believed I did. I took this contract specifically because it brought me back to Pale Anvil." He met her eyes without wavering. "I wanted to be here when you came. I wanted to tell you what I am telling you now, face to face, because your father deserved to have his name cleared by someone who was in the room when the events occurred, and who understood what actually happened and what did not." She was quiet for a moment. "Cole Birch," she said. He did not look away. "I found him on day 6 of his deployment, his position. He had his rifle on me and I had mine on him, and we stayed that way for a while. Then I put mine down. He held for 30 seconds more. Then he put his down." Something moved in the older man's expression, brief and genuine. He was a good operator. He understood the situation more clearly than most people would have in his position. "I told him to walk west. That if he walked west for long enough, he would find a ranch road and eventually a town. I told him to leave everything that identified him as military." He paused. "He did. He was found 9 days later by a county road crew outside of Marathon, Texas, severely dehydrated but alive. He is currently under medical evaluation and is expected to receive a medical discharge." Stokes listed him as undetermined. Stokes believed what he needed to believe to maintain his operational architecture. No heat in the voice. A simple observation. "Cole Birch is alive. You can verify that through channels I cannot access, but you can. When you do, you will find I am telling you the truth." He took one step back, not retreating, giving her space that was not about threat and distance, but about the particular space a person opens when they have said what they came to say, and are prepared to leave it with the other person. Your father was a good man who was used without his knowledge for purposes he would not have agreed to. That was not his fault, and it did not change what he was. What he was someone who taught a generation of shooters in these canyons, some of whom used what he gave them badly, and at least one of whom has spent 20 years trying to understand how to account for that. He looked at her for one more moment. You are better at this than he was. He knew that before he died. He told me so, at Pale Anvil, in the winter before he went. He turned and walked north along the canyon rim, moving through the dark terrain with the familiarity of someone who knows every inch of it. And in 20 seconds he was gone as completely as if the desert had accepted him back without comment. She stood on the limestone shelf with her sidearm still raised at empty air. The canyon breathed below her. The stars were enormous and cold. The Che Tak M200 with her father's name pressed into its metal was a weight across her back that she had carried for 3 days without knowing what it was. She lowered the sidearm. She looked north along the rim for a long time. Then she shouldered her pack and started moving. She drove back to Laughlin as the sky went pale in the east. The desert moving past the windows in the pre-dawn gray, flat then broken then flat again, the specific terrain of a landscape that does not change its character for any of the 240 miles between Pale Anvil and the base. Harlan Stokes was in his office when she arrived. He had not gone home. She sat down across from him and placed Cole Birch's hidden page flat on the desk between them. He looked at it. He did not pick it up. Cole Birch is alive, she said. I want you to confirm that. The pause lasted 3 seconds. He was located 9 days after his last transmission, Stokes said. Outside Marathon. He is currently under medical evaluation at a facility in San Antonio. His family was told his status was undetermined. Yes. That changes today. Stokes nodded once, without hesitation. How much of the 1997 program did you know? She said. He was quiet for the measured moment of a man deciding how much weight he will carry once he says a thing out loud that has only ever lived inside him. I was a captain in 1997, attached to a joint program under a designation that no longer exists in any active file. We use civilian contractors for specific training elements because civilian contractors do not generate the documentation that military personnel generate. Your father was one of 12 contractors engaged over a period of approximately 18 months. He set both hands flat on the desk. He was given accurate information about the program's general nature and inaccurate information about the composition of the trainee groups. He believed he was training American contract security personnel. The group that included the man you met last night contained foreign nationals from 3 separate countries with existing relationships to intelligence services not aligned with American interests. Your father had no mechanism for knowing that. He was never read in at the level that would have told him. He never knew. Not from us, not officially. Stokes looked at the page on the desk. Whether he assembled it over time on his own, I cannot tell you with certainty. She thought of the journal, of the last page, of the entry she had not yet finished reading. The program, she said. Stokes looked at her. This is not a point for discussion, she said. Cole Birch's family receives an accurate accounting within appropriate classification limits. He receives full honors recognition. And Overwatch Spectre is restructured from the ground up with oversight that reports outside this chain of command. Those are not negotiable items. Stokes was quiet for a long moment. Agreed, he said. The closed session before the Senate Intelligence Committee convened on a Tuesday morning in October, in a conference room at an address that does not appear in any public record. She sat with a voice filter over her microphone and no identification on her person. And there were 6 senators and 2 committee staff members, and a recording device, and the particular quality of serious institutional silence. The senior senator, a woman from Ohio with 19 years on the committee, asked Wren to begin. She spoke for 40 minutes. She covered Overwatch Spectre's operational structure, the events at Pale Anvil, Cole Birch's documentation, the honey trap architecture, and the institutional decision-making that had sent a 26-year-old operator into Sector as bait for a cover-up he was never told existed. She did not editorialize. She presented the facts in sequence with the same precision she applied to a firing solution, because precision is more persuasive than emotion, and the people in this room respond to clarity. When she finished, the senator from Ohio looked at her notes and then looked up. "What outcome do you want from this proceeding, Sergeant?" 3 words. "Fix the program." The senator wrote something on her notepad. "Define fix," she said. "Remove the people who compromised its purpose. Build an oversight structure that reports outside the standard program chain of command. Provide accurate accounting to the families of all operators whose status is currently listed as undetermined. Give the people doing the actual work a mission that is what it says it is and nothing else." The senator looked at her for a moment in the way experienced people look at each other, when they recognize that the person across from them has done the thinking and arrived at the right answer. "We will take this under review," she said. "I know," Wren said. "I am asking you to do more than review it." The senator almost smiled. "So noted." Overwatch Spectre was restructured over the following 8 months in ways that appeared in no public document. Harlan Stokes was reassigned to a position at Fort Meade, whose title was a long distance from any operations corridor. The restructuring created an independent oversight function, reporting through a channel that could not be accessed or redirected by people operating on Stokes's previous assumptions. Cole Birch received full honors accounting. His family received a visit from a 2-star general who sat in their living room in Flagstaff and told them the truth about what their son had done and where he had gone and why the country owed him a debt it had failed to pay. 18 months after his family's last official communication had been a form letter with a box checked, they had a complete record, a full accounting, and a flag. The day Wren was offered command of the training element, she was sitting in a plain room at an installation without a public address, across from a woman she had not met before whose rank was apparent in the way she occupied the room rather than in any visible insignia. The offer came in 2 sentences. The acceptance came in 1. The woman slid a folder across the table. 5 candidates. Selection criteria are yours to determine. Wren opened the folder and read each file with the same thoroughness she had brought to Cole Birch's notebook, looking not only at what the records said, but at what they were careful not to say. The gaps and the precise language and the difference between how a file describes what a person does well and how it describes what they do when the situation removes all support and leaves only the person and the problem. Those are always different things, and the difference is the only thing that matters for this work. She took the files home to Alpine. She read them on the porch of her father's house with the desert going through its evening colors and made her assessments in pencil in the margins. The 5 candidates came to her over 3 weeks. Each arrived alone. Each sat across from her in the same plain room, answered the same questions, and completed the same 2-day field evaluation in the Big Bend backcountry under the same conditions. She observed all 5 of them from elevated positions they could not identify, using the same techniques she had used at Pale Anvil. She released 3. The first on day 2, technically exceptional in every measurable category. Released because when the evaluation required 4 hours of absolute stillness in direct sun with no change in observable conditions, he shifted position at the 3-hour mark. Not from physical discomfort, from the unbearable quality of silence without activity. She recognized the failure because her father had trained her specifically against it. Stillness is not the absence of doing. It is a different form of doing. Either you have the will for it, or you do not, and it cannot be installed. The second on day 1. When asked what had drawn them to this specific work, the answer described it in terms of individual distinction. The need to be recognized as someone who could do what others could not. She understood that impulse. In a program requiring permanent anonymity, it was a structural mismatch that no volume of skill could correct. The third on day 3, which was the hardest release she made, because this candidate was the finest technical operator she had assessed in 20 years of this work. She released them because on the final morning of the evaluation, under severe physical stress, they made a small calculation error in a ballistic problem, caught it themselves, corrected it, and continued without flagging the deviation. The instinct was sound in isolation. In a program operating outside standard oversight, the instinct to correct and conceal without reporting was exactly the failure mode that had allowed Stokes's compromised architecture to persist for 3 years. She would not build that pattern into her structure from the first selection. The 2 she kept understood what the other 3 did not yet understand and might never understand. That the work was the reward, because there was no other reward available. That patience and silence were not the price paid to do the interesting parts. They were the interesting parts. And that carrying something important without anyone knowing you are carrying it is not a burden to be endured. It is a specific form of dignity that most people are never offered. She told them this on the last afternoon of the evaluation on a limestone shelf above a Big Bend canyon, with the desert going amber around them. One of them nodded immediately. The other was quiet for a long time before saying simply that they understood. She believed both of them without reservation. The program's first operational deployment under the restructured oversight happened 14 months later. A ranger element in the Mojave training range. One of Wren's graduates on the high ground. The rangers completed their assessment without incident. Nobody asked why conditions had been notably favorable. 8 rangers went home. Wren received a single line on an encrypted channel. No sender, no identification. Clean, good work. She read it and went to sleep. 18 years pass the way years pass when you are doing important work with serious people in a continuous and disciplined way. Not quickly, not slowly, each year carrying its own weight. 2 graduates became 4, 4 became 9, 9 became a structure. She remained in alpine and trained candidates in the canyons her father had taught her, at the ranges and angles that the terrain made possible only for those who understood it. And she kept Frank Callahan's patrol journal on her desk, and the Che TAC M200 in its case beside the window. She had read the last page of the journal the night she came back from Laughlin after the meeting with Stokes. She had sat on the porch of the house in Alpine with the desert dark and wide around her, and read the final entry, the one not addressed to anyone and addressed entirely to her. He had written it in the last year of his life, already sick, already aware of what was coming, and he had written it the way he did everything, without excess and without omission. He had written that he had not known in 1997, that over the years that followed, as he watched the regions where he believed his students had gone, the shape of it had assembled itself the way honest men assemble truths they did not ask for. He had not gone to anyone with what he suspected because he had no proof, and because surfacing it would have required him to surface his own unwitting role, and he was not certain the exposure would help anyone it had already damaged. He had written that in the last winter before he died, a man had come to Pale Anvil, that the two of them had stood on the canyon rim in the cold and spoken for a long time, that the conversation had contained things that were too late to change, and one thing that was not. The rifle, the cache, his name in the metal. He had trusted the rifle would be found when it needed to be found, by the person who needed to find it. The last line of the entry was 6 words. "You are better at this than I was." She had sat with those 6 words on the porch for a long time. Then she had gone inside and slept, for the first time in a long time, without waking in the night. On a Tuesday morning in the 22nd year of Overwatch Spectre's restructured operation, she was at the desk in the plane interview room when the door opened, and the next candidate came in. The candidate was 24 years old. The file said Specialist Nora Prout. Wren had reviewed it the previous evening and had paused at the Family Service History section. Father, Master Sergeant Dwight Prout, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired honorably after 21 years of service and 4 combat deployments. She had set the file down and looked at the window for a moment. Then she had read the rest. Nora Prout sat down across the desk with the composed and unhurried stillness of someone who has confidence the way a person has their own height. Not performed, simply present. She had her father's particular quality of forward attention, the way of giving the thing directly in front of you complete focus, and trusting that everything else will wait. She set something on the desk between them. A shell casing. Che-tac. The brass worn warm and brown from years of handling, the particular oxidation that accumulates when a piece of metal has lived in someone's pocket through seasons and ordinary days. It had been carried for a long time. Anyone could see that. "My father kept these," Nora Prout said. "He found them at Pale Anvil after an operation 22 years ago. He kept them because they were the only record of something that had no other record. He told me the story every year, from when I was old enough to follow it until the last time I saw him before I enlisted." She paused with her father's deliberateness, briefly and with purpose. "He said whoever fired those rounds was the finest soldier he had not seen in 21 years of service. He said if I ever found the chance to learn from whoever left those casings, I should take it and not ask questions." Wren looked at the shell casing on the table between them, at the warm, oxidized brass that had traveled from a canyon rim in the Big Bend to the pocket of a ranger who carried it home and kept it for 22 years because he believed in what it represented even without a name to attach to the belief, and who had told his daughter about it every year on her birthday until the story became part of who she was. "You understand this program does not exist," Wren said. "Yes, ma'am." "You understand that no one will ever know your name in connection with any work you do here." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand that the work is the entirety of the reward. There is no other accounting." Nora Prout held her gaze steadily. "My father came home from Pale Anvil when the math said he should not have. He had 8 men with him. He never knew how it happened or who made it possible." A pause that held Dwight Prout's quality of careful speech. He knew something had. He knew someone had chosen to stay when leaving was the easier choice. He said that was the thing he wanted me to understand about what this work could be if I was serious about doing it. The choice to stay. She looked at Wren directly. "That was enough for me to come here." Wren picked up the shell casing, held it in her palm. The warm, oxidized brass, the specific modest weight of a round that has done what it was made for. She held it for a moment. Then she put it back on the table and pushed it toward Nora Prout. "Keep it. You will need something to remind you of why you are here on the days when why does not feel like enough." After Nora Prout left, Wren sat alone at the desk in the plain room for several minutes without moving. The late afternoon light came through the window at the angle it takes in West Texas at this hour, amber and long, the same light that had come through the kitchen window of her father's house in Alpine on the evenings. He came back from the canyons with the desert still on his clothes. She opened the desk drawer and took out Frank Callahan's patrol journal. She held it for a moment, then she set it on the desk. Beside the journal in the center of the desk was a sealed envelope she had found at the facility front desk when she arrived that morning. Her name on it, written by hand. Beneath her name, the name of a law office in Alpine, Texas. The receptionist had explained it was dropped off by a courier the previous week, with instructions that it be held for a Wren Callahan and delivered the next time she came to the facility. She had left it sealed all morning. She picked it up now and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a set of geographic coordinates written out in degrees and minutes, precise enough to locate a specific point within 20 meters. Below the coordinates, 4 handwritten words. He wants to talk. No name, no date, no return address. She looked at the coordinates for a long time. Then she looked out the window at the training ground below, where Nora Prout had stopped walking and was standing in the open, looking south toward the canyon terrain with the patient assessing quality that Wren had spent 22 years learning to recognize in candidates and had seen perhaps a handful of times before. Not calculating, reading, letting the terrain tell her what it knew. Dwight Prout had raised her on the right stories. Wren folded the envelope and put it in her chest pocket. She stood up from the desk, picked up the patrol journal and the Chey-Tac case and walked to the door. She paused in the frame and looked back at the plane room, the desk, the window, the amber light falling across the floor where no one would ever see it and where it fell anyway, because that is what light does. Then she walked out into the Big Bend evening. On the training ground below, Nora Prout stood on the limestone with the desert going gold around her, completely still, reading the canyon the way someone reads a place they have been told about their entire life and are finally standing inside. Pale Anvil had a new name on the ridge now. What happened next was already in motion. It had been in motion for 22 years, since the night a man set a water bottle on a rock ledge in the dark and faced the high ground and nodded at something he could not see. And whatever it was going to become, it was going to become it the way this country becomes everything, slowly, without announcement, in the enormous silence between one person doing the right thing and the next person learning how.